So the first reading today is Exodus 20, verses 1 through 17. Do you want to read, Donna?
I will. A reading from the book of Exodus. In those days, God delivered all these commandments. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that place of slavery. You shall not have other gods besides me. You shall not carve idols for yourselves in the shape of anything in the sky above, or on the earth, or below, on the earth below, or in the waters beneath the earth. You shall not bow down before them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, inflicting punishment for their fathers' wickedness on the children of those who hate me, down to the third and fourth generation, but bestowing mercy down to the 1,000th generation on the children of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave unpunished the ones who take his name in vain. Remember to keep holy the Sabbath day. 6 days you may work and you may labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of your Lord your God. No work may be done then either by you or your son or your daughter or your male or female slave or your beast or by the alien who lives with you. In 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But on the seventh day he rested. That is why the Lord has blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that you may have a long life in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male or female slave, nor his ox or ass, nor anything else that belongs to him. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. All righty. We got a lot to cover here. So the first thing that's pointed out is God delivered all these commandments. So these aren't man-made, these are from God. So God is the one that gave us the 10 commandments. He's the origin of them. It's not just somebody made these up to punish us. Jesus kind of summarized it in saying, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, strength, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. I mean, that he kind of summarized the 10 commandments, but then he went into the Beatitudes, and he took the literal meaning of the commandments, and he applied it how they should be applied. Because the way the Jews were looking at it at that point is that, well, I did everything up to murder, but I didn't murder. You shall not kill. I broke both his legs and one arm and poked out his eyes, but I didn't kill him. So I didn't break the commandment. So Jesus said, no, that's all wrong. You got to look at what the intention was of these commandments. And then he took it even further. For example, he said, if you even, call your brother a fool, you've broken this commandment. So he takes it to a much further level. And so I'm going to go through an examination of conscience, which goes through some of the precepts of the 10 commandments. So, for I am the Lord your God, you shall not have strange gods before me. Mortal sins would be involvement in occult practices, witchcraft, Ouija boards, seances, palm reading, tarot cards, divination, astrology, black magic, sorcery, involvement in atheism, agnostic, New Age, apostasy, which is leaving the church, adhering to a schismatic group, putting faith in superstitions, good luck charms, etc., joining the Masons or other secret societies, receiving Holy Communion in the state of mortal sin, receiving the sacrament of confirmation or matrimony while in a state of mortal sin, willfully participation in illicit general absolution services, which actually happened at a church that my sister went to. This was just like 8-10 years ago, where the priest says, well, you're all absolved. Instead of it was never valid.
They did away with that Mason.
So any of those sins, you better confess them again, because we never confessed it anyway. So.
But God wouldn't hold people who thought that.
Oh, of course not. God, let's presume on His mercy. We'll get to that in a bit.
You ever heard of fire and brimstone?
Yeah, we're here. This is just the beginning. We're only in number 1. Being married by the justice of the peace or minister of another denomination.
Hell, death, and damnation.
Involvement in a false or pagan worship. Willfully denying the faith of the Catholic Church.
What are you reading?
Denying or despairing of God's grace or mercy. Presumption. Committing a mortal sin with the idea that you can just go to confession. Well, I'll whack that guy and then I'll go to confession later. That was an old mafia way, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Still is.
That's presumption. But that's presumption. That's presuming on God's mercy. And so there's other ways of doing it besides, that happening. I mean, well, I'm going to commit this sin and I can go to confession later. I mean, hatred of God, simony, which is buying or selling spiritual things, failure to receive Holy Communion at least once per year, and desecration of the Holy Eucharist. That's number 1. Number 2, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. So if you look at this one, he said, for the Lord will not leave unpunished the one who takes his name in vain. What does this mean? So that doesn't mean, saying, oh my God, help, or whatever. In generally, this typically means it's been kind of thought of as doing things in God's name for like evil purposes, like Ali Akbar, in the Islam, they're killing and doing suicide bombing in God's name, and as a good, and it's not. It's evil. They're doing evil in God's name, or pedophile priests are doing things that using their position and doing evil things in God's names. Name. And so those are typically, but they have a lot of, here's what they have. Using God's name intentionally as a curse. Seriously wishing evil upon another. Serious slander or insult of a sacred person or object. Making an oath in a secret society. Telling a lie or withholding a serious sin in confession. So if you go to confession, you think, I don't want to tell Father that. That's a serious sin. You may have went in with one sin, you came out with 2. Blasphemy, words of hatred, reproach, or defiance toward God, speaking ill of God. Perjury, lying under oath. So we had a whole lot of that going on lately here in the government. Swearing false oaths. But this commandment is something, it says God will not leave this unpunished. So what does this mean? There's going to be punishment. I mean, it's something God said He won't leave as unpunished, because the name of God is sacred, and we have to always remember that. That's something. If you have a habit of using the Lord's name in vain, correct yourself of it real fast. I usually, when I hear it, I'll go like this, and if I hear it in front of someone, someone says it, I'll immediately make the sign of the cross, and I think that just lets them know that. Because people don't even realize it, they do it for so many years and it just comes out of their mouth. Remember to keep holy the Lord's Day, missing Mass on Sunday or a holy day of obligation without a serious reason. There can be serious reasons, but doing unnecessary work on Sunday for a long period of time, more than several hours, is what it says here. Intentional failure to fast or abstain on appointed days. Requiring employees to work on Sunday in non-essential occupations. Honor your father and mother. Okay, we got it. All of us need to do this. Serious failure to care for aged parents. Serious neglect of the duties of one's state in life. Serious disrespect or disobedience to parents, superiors, or authorities. Wishing death or evil on parents. Abuse or serious neglect of children, failure to baptize children in a reasonable time after birth, serious neglect of the religious education or upbringing of children, Failure to carry out the last will of a deceased parent. So that's the fourth commandment. You shall not kill. You can't. So when they say kill, that's typically murder, homicide, or manslaughter. There is justified killing, like if you're in a war for a just cause. Like you're in a war and you're fighting the Nazis. Yeah, I mean, you should be killing. You should be very good at it. Procurement of an abortion, that's another one. Promoting, counseling, or paying for an abortion. Knowingly voting for someone who is pro-abortion. That's a violation of the fifth commandment. Willfully injuring or trying to hurt another person. Willfully leading another into serious sin. Driving dangerously or recklessly.
Oh, come on, you're ahead.
Who's hiding behind the post over here?
Everybody better go to confession.
Who's hiding?
I've confessed it.
You can tell by the smile on his face when he's lying.
Driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Willfully harboring hatred for another. Taking or selling illegal drugs. Willful drunkenness. Self-mutilation. Excessive tattoos. Excessive body piercings. Sterilization. Promotion of euthanasia or involvement in it. Attempting suicide. Willful failure to bury the body of the dead. Willful engagement in unjust lawsuits. Bigotry, hatred for people of other races. Intentionally placing temptations before the weak. So that was number 5. Number 6, we're halfway. You shall not commit adultery. No adultery, fornication, that's intercourse prior to marriage. Masturbation or impure acts with self. Homosexual acts, use of a contraception, dressing in a manner intended to cause arousal in another, allowing another to act in inappropriate manners, intentionally causing stuff that should happen only in marriage. I'm changing it around a little bit.
Way worse at school.
Okay.
You want to borrow my glasses?
What's that?
Can I borrow my glasses?
No, I can see.
Okay,
I'm taking it down a little bit.
Water it a little bit?
Intentional withdrawal, onanism,
Okay.
flagrant immodesty in dress, bestiality, oral sex, anal sex, prostitution, rape, surrogate motherhood, selective reduction of babies in the womb, human cloning, desertion, incest, polygamy, cohabitation prior to marriage, destroying the innocence of another by seducing or introducing them to immorality, lust in the heart. If I could, I would. Swinging or wife swapping, and cross-dressing. You shall not steal. Stealing a large amount of money or a valuable item. It doesn't say the amount. It just says large here, but so, I mean, if you know it's wrong, the rule is, if you know it's wrong, you know God doesn't want you to do it, and you do it anyways, it's pretty serious, right? I mean, that's kind of the way you should look at it. I mean, we don't, we say, I didn't fall on that list, that I don't remember that one. That's an easy way to think about it is, I know it's wrong, and God, it's clearly wrong, and I shouldn't do it, but I'm doing it anyways, because destroying or defacing another's property, stealing something consecrated to God, buying, selling, or receiving items that are known to be stolen, failure to make restitution, excessive gambling, defrauding workers of their wages, failure to fulfill work requirements, padding expenses, taking advantage of the poor, denying help to the poor, defrauding creditors, bribery, blackmail, fraud, price fixing, tax evasion, forgery, excessive waste, violating copyright, pirating computers, slavery, and serious cruelty to animals. Initially, the first thing they said is pretty much all the other commandments can be wrapped up in stealing. Because you're either stealing something that's due to God or due to another person in a lot of ways. I mean, so you can kind of look at this stealing. You're stealing that which is due to God and that which is due to other men. The first thought that happened, the first principle that was here was that they would steal other people. They would kidnap them. That was the first thought of it. That was the first thing that's mentioned again and again, is because that's what they would do. They would go in, they would raid, they would steal, they would kidnap people and then put them into slavery. They'd sell the people for slaves. And so that was the first thing prohibited. And this is a huge change from what was going on in all the other cultures, like the Hammurabi, which was the book of Hammurabi, which is what existed at that point in Babylon. It said you could kidnap and put people into slavery. So when this Jewish law came out, that was a complete change of what was going on in the world up to that point. So you got to look at things as they were at that point, because this is the first step in elimination of slavery. And actually the next step is saying they're not to work. You're not to have anybody work on a Sunday. That's on the Sabbath. So if you're a slave, it's given them rights as a human being, right? They're not just, they have rights not to work on the Sabbath also. And so there's restrictions. And so then and it's because of our Christian background. That's why slavery is not, in all Christian countries. It's been eliminated. But it's still not, it's still, throughout the world, there's still a lot of slavery that takes place. And there's trafficking, human trafficking, which, what's coming over our U.S. border right now is trafficking in a lot of ways. And they're putting people into slavery. You shall not bear false witness, so you won't perjure yourself under oath, telling large or premeditated lies, so little lies are fine. Serious. I'm asking a question. No, there's still a venial sin, right? If you're lying, because who's the father of lies? Satan, exactly. Serious gossip, detraction, and that's revealing the faults of another without serious reason. Calumny, harming the reputation of another. Violation of a confidence without good reason. Being an accomplice to another's grave sin. So, hey, do you want to go to this?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's a mortal sin. You shall not desire your neighbor's wife. So, no looking at pornography, books, magazines, internet. No reading sexually explicit materials. No dwelling on impure thoughts or fantasies for the purpose of arousal. No lusting after another, willfully lusting after another. You shall not desire your neighbor's goods. Serious, willful greed or avarice. Intention to steal or destroy the goods of another. Now that doesn't mean if your neighbor, let's say, they're doing well. Well, you can't desire their particular wife or things. If somebody's doing well, it's okay to say, wow, he got a car. It's okay to say, well, I'd like a car like that. There's a difference between saying, I want his car or I want his wife. That's kind of the difference there. These are just the mortal sins. There's another 12 pages on venial. We'll kind of skip over them for today. God wrote the book. This is Father Robert Altier, and it has a nihil by the bishop.
Mm-hmm.
And so preparation for the sacrament of confession. And these are all pretty much accepted through the catechism. And so this is Father Rippinger's, is a lot more intense than this. This is, so we'll start with his, and then we'll graduate in a couple of years to Father Rippinger's. But it's pretty intense list, isn't it? There's a lot of stuff in there. And so, we got to keep that in mind, is that without God's help, can we do it on our own? No, absolutely not. And that's especially when you take into account, this examination takes into account what Jesus said in the Beatitudes. It's not just the actual committing of, killing or committing an adultery. Well, we did everything up to that point. Or, this is taken not just a letter of the law, but it's actually taken the spirit, what God intended by that law. And so Jesus exemplifies. And so the only way we can do it is with the power of God himself. And I think you have to understand that, is that on our own we can't do it. It's totally impossible. And so if you look at your life and you say, well, I'm violated, and I am violating about 2/3 of these, you got to start and just say, Lord, I need your help. I think that's a big part, is that you're a child of God and he wants to help you, right? He's a good father and he wants to help you. He wants you in heaven. He wants every one of us in heaven, and he's going to help us. And so don't despair. That's another sin if you do despair. So.
You're going fishing for 12 hours.
So
Father has a checklist of what you haven't done, and it's very short.
I think it's important, though, that we keep that in mind, that the whole intention of this is for our good. Because when I was growing up, it was more of I was just like, I got to follow these rules. It just seemed like a lot of rules to follow. Like, what the heck? I mean, that was kind of the way. That was the way they used to teach it. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't do don't do anything. Okay, yeah, sure, I'll follow that.
Burn,
So,
burn, go to hell.
well, but that's not the way I like to try to tell people. It's kind of when you have a child and you're cooking and they want to put their hand on the hot fire, you tell them, no, don't do that, right? Because if they do it, they get burned. Or else, we used to put a knife in the sockets. You do it once and you kind of get a jolt.
Get a little joke.
They used to have the cigarette lighters, and you put your finger on it, and they'd have all the round circles. It was kind of neat to look at, and it smelled kind of cool too. But it would hurt.
Don't give them any ideas. They'll start to smile.
They don't have cigarette anymore.
They don't have them anymore. That's old school. But they're not just. But it's for our own good, right? So God's given us these things for our own good, not to keep us. It's because he loves us and he wants us to be well and be with him forever. And so we have the world looks at it as like, oh, these are all good things we should be doing. Every one of these things in here pretty much should be promoted. The world would say, oh, that's good, we should do that. Oh, yeah. And, oh, yeah, we should have a pyre. Oh, yeah, we should tax. Oh, yeah, anything to get away with fraud, blackmail. Oh, every kind of sexual sin is great. That's what the world's trying to tell us.
So what's the definition of tax evasion?
We can do tax avoidance, but not evasion, because we're required to pay to Caesar that which is Caesar's. We're required to pay, because the government, God allowed this institution to get set up. And so pay your property taxes. Colleen will be over there to collect later.
Don't you know they got that new proposal up that they want you to sign out to tax the tax?
Do what?
Hey, listen, this is
There's
not a
no,
political
it's out there, they were at the Eastern Market.
Oh, they want to axe all property tax?
Yeah.
I'm going to sign that.
There was a senator talking about that, wasn't there?
But they're gonna get their money somehow, though. How they
Do it
get-
on sales tax.
Sales tax.
But they're gonna raise that sales tax. So is it cheaper for you to pay the property tax or that big increase in sales tax?
Sales tax.
I don't know.
Well, if there is a sales tax, anybody who buys anything, if they're actually paying something,
In the state or out of state.
then they're going to be paying the tax. So if you're running an illegal business, you're still paying the tax on the sales tax, right? Even if you're getting money from, an illegal, anyway, you're paying that tax. I'm not just paying it all myself, because I noticed one thing, my taxes go up a lot every year. I'm like, how did it go up this much? I pay as much in taxes as people pay in rent. It's just crazy. And so, and so I would like to see a sales tax where I think that's fair, where everybody's paying something. It's fair for me, I like it, so.
There's just a lot of
Yeah.
questions I would have, like who's gonna support the schools? Where's the money for schools gonna come from?
Lottery.
The lottery's been doing it.
Billions.
What do you mean? We got the pot
I
houses.
love that lottery, like, don't you?
They got all these dispensaries. What are they doing that for? Is that all up in smoke or what?
I don't know, there's just, I would have a lot of questions on that.
I know, I do too. I'm just putting it out there to be I don't want to say devil's advocate after reading that.
If you sign that, would that be considered you're trying to get tax evasion?
No,
No, because of taxes, they're gonna.
no, because they're going to get some another source. The problem is when they change it, you're going to end up paying more. Everybody will pay more, because that's the way it always works. Even income tax was supposed to be a temporary item. That never went away.
They ain't gonna use it.
No. So
What about Proposition A? Remember when Anger brought that in, everybody was like, the world's gonna die, it's gonna
Right.
come to an end, and didn't change.
no. Okay, let's get into this psalm now that we've
Beat it.
kind of covered. Anybody have any questions on the 10 Commandments that we covered? Any of these? Was anybody surprised by any of them?
Oh, yeah.
You were what were?
Absolutely, tax evasion.
Oh yeah, that's well. I mean, it's a crime against. So God allows society to set up, and you're to pay. He allows society and they're governed. That's how he gets his divine laws supposed to. And so and unfortunately, God allows rulers. I mean, even Nebuchadnezzar, he allowed him to come to power. I mean, so God will use judgment through governments. I mean, so if the U.S. needs judgment, it's going to come from another government, probably our enemy, probably some godless atheist country. You know, that's typically what God does in the past. I mean, he pronounces judgment because his faithful people are being terrible. And so he chastises because, you know, you tell them, no, don't do that. And hopefully they'll correct themselves and do right. And that's typically what's happened in the last, you know, since the whole Bible, 5,000 years, pretty much. So, who would like to read the psalm?
That's not yours, so.
I'll do it.
Okay.
Denise.
This,
Nieces.
Lord, you have the words of everlasting life.
Lord, you have the words of everlasting life.
The law of the Lord is perfect, refreshing the soul. The decree of the Lord is trustworthy, giving wisdom to the simple.
Lord, you have the words of everlasting life.
The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing with the heart. The command of the Lord is clear, enlightening the eye.
Lord, you have the words of everlasting life.
The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The ordinances of the Lord are true, all of them just.
Lord, you have the words of everlasting life.
They are more precious than gold, than a heap of purest gold, sweeter than syrup or honey from the comb.
Lord, you have the words of everlasting life. So here we see David praising God because the wisdom that he gave in the 10 Commandments. So you can see how it kind of ties in. This law is perfect. It refreshes the soul. Were you guys feeling refreshed as I went through this? Refreshed. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. It enlightens the eye, so it gives light to our eye. They are more precious than gold. God's law is true. It's never ending. It's just. It's more precious than the ring from the Lord of the Rings. It gives wisdom to the simple. Like for youth, I mean, it should guide people. It should be guiding us as we want to make a decision. This should help guide us to what is the correct decision to make in life. God gave us these principles so that it's a lot easier to follow. If you know the rules how to do something, it's a lot easier to live, right? Because you just follow the rules. I mean, you have to have that self-mastery where you can follow the rules. But it's a lot easier. Decision-making is a lot easier. It's yes or no, as opposed to how we typically, we try to weasel our way out of different, well, maybe I can do, how far can I go and still be under the mortal sin category here. And so that's what the Jews were doing too, is they'd say, well, we can do everything but kill. I didn't kill. I'm still observant of the law. I didn't kill him. It was close, but he got better. So, I mean, that's where Jesus was appalled. He's like, no, you're not. You guys are hypocrites. You're not following what God intended by this law. And so I think that's clear, but it's the principles, they're not going to change. And they do have the words of everlasting life. And so will they go away? I mean, will these commandments ever go away where they're not valid anymore?
No.
Can we just disregard them and say,
No.
just be hearers of the word, not doers of the word? That's what James said. Don't be that. So, okay. second reading. It's a short one. Who wants to read that? Do you want to read that?
Reading from St. Paul.
Yeah, St. Paul to the Corinthians.
A reading from the first letter of St. Paul to Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom. But we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. But to those who are called, Jews and Greeks alike, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Very good. Okay, so we have St. Paul, and the first thing we have to look at is what's he talking about? The Jews demand signs. So the Jews wanted miracles, right? They wanted miracles, and what did they tell Jesus? They said, what sign can you do? They wanted him to do magic tricks, basically. And it would never be enough. And even when he did do signs, for example, the one that was born blind from birth, they didn't believe him. They said, you're not this guy. And he said, I am that guy. And they said, well, let's get your parents. And the parents said, yeah, he's the one. He was born blind from birth. Well, how'd he get healed? Well, we don't know. We weren't there. Ask him. He's of age. And then they went back and they pretty much disregarded it. I mean, so even though the miracle was clearly a miracle that was beyond any other reason, they rejected it. Same with Lazarus. And even when Jesus rose from the dead, they paid off the soldiers to say, oh, the people took him away. So for the Jews, they had this notion that Jesus was, the Messiah was going to come back and it was going to be a ruler, a conqueror. They didn't see a meek ruler or someone that was going to die. I mean, they just couldn't even conceptualize that. So they didn't look at Isaiah 53, right, where it was predicted, or Psalm 22, where the Messiah is shown as a suffering servant. They thought he was going to come in as a conquering, basically war hero and just destroy the Romans and clean house. And so you have the cross, and the cross does one of two things. The cross either will lead you to salvation if you embrace the cross, but if you reject the cross, you're going to hell. I mean, there's really the two choices. I think it's interesting here too, because Paul, in the way he words this, salvation isn't a done deal, right? Because that's where we vary. Some people say, oh, I'm saved, that's it. Once saved, always saved. But Paul's Greek, it depicts that salvation's not a done deal, as the final verdict of God's judgment is still open, right? So there's still hope if you're in sin and you're perishing, which means you're in sin. If you died right now, you'd probably be thrown into hell. I mean, if that's where you're at, but there's still hope because you're not dead. So you can still repent, right? There's still that hope. You can still turn to God and say, I repent, I'm sorry, Lord. And then you'll be saved. But there are dangers for those who are on the right path, because you can still say, I had enough of this Christianity. I'm going to go follow the 10 sins, all the things. I'm going to do the opposite of what it says not to do in this book. And so there's dangers, so you can lose your salvation. And so that's pretty implicit here in Paul's, the way he words it also. Then he goes on to say, who is the scribe? I don't even know if they have it in there. They don't have it. Because they have here is, who is the scribe? Who is the wise man? And that's kind of a little bit of a mockery, because they're thinking, the scribe, oh, I know everything about the law from the Jewish point of view. And the Greeks were so the Jews were about signs and miracles. And so it was a stumbling block for Jesus to come that way, in terms of a meek person that, he didn't have this sign. He could have just told him so, that's why they said even at the end, get yourself off the cross, right? And so what we do is we just preach that Jesus is the Word that became flesh, right? So the Word became flesh. He lived on this earth. He did a lot of miracles, right? He proved his divinity while he was here. And then he was a sacrifice for our sins, and he died on the cross. And then he rose from the dead, right? And so that's the Christian message. We don't have to do much more than preach that. That is all we have to really tell people, is that's the Christian message. I mean, it gets deeper and deeper, but that's the essence of it. But if you're a Greek, you can't, I mean, they're philosophers, they're debaters. And so for them, they don't believe that, well, God is out there, he's far away. He would never become flesh. And the fact that God would become flesh, and then you take this blood and that's going to save you from your sins, they would laugh. And that's what happened, is when Paul was debating the Greeks, they said, "You're mad, Paul. Too much learning has made you completely insane." Because they said, how is this possible? Why would God ever become flesh? You know, God is so much greater than humans. He's otherworldly. The Greeks would say, no, that's not possible. And so you can see where, for the Greeks, the cross, Jesus, God becoming flesh and dying for us, that's foolishness. They think that's just insanity. I mean, and for the Jews, that doesn't fit with the narrative that they want to see, which is a conquering ruler. And so in both cases, they're wrong. But what they're missing is that God is wiser than human wisdom. And so when you think about God has intimate knowledge of all of human history, of every star that he created, of every atom, every electron, neutron, proton, quark, I mean, you name it. God knows everything about all of them intimately. He knows the rotation of every one. He knows every galaxy, and he's named every star, it says. So trillions. God is that intimate. So he's so much wiser than we are. And so his foolishness is greater than the greatest wisdom of men. And I kind of went through and I looked at, we had a guy in the Old Testament who is the wisest of all men. King Solomon, right? And so what did King Solomon do? God made him the wisest of all men. So first, he became the greatest educated man in the world. He learned everything he could. He had more knowledge than any person that ever was and around him or anyone in that time. And what he realized is that the more I know, the more my heart is troubled. So the wiser and smarter I get, the sadder I get. And that was his conclusion. So the more we know, the more we realize we don't really know. And then the things that we really need to know, we can't know. So it'd be really nice to know about what's going to happen after we die exactly. Like, you can't know that with physical testing and, you have to have faith. You can't really know that without the wisdom of God. You would like to know that, but you can't know that, and that makes you sad. And even the things that you only know incompletely, because we only have partial knowledge. Of anything we know, we don't know it completely. We know little bits and pieces of it. And then the second thing, he said, well, I give up on that. And so then he knew all women and wine. He got blasted and partied. And so he took that to the limit. And he said that only led to vanities of vanities. It didn't lead anywhere. It was just... and then he said, well, I'm going to pursue getting tons of money and building projects. And he built tons of things. And he acquired more wealth than anyone around. And he just amassed more than any person at that time. And so he said that's all vanity too. It led to nothing. And then he said, well, it's better to be wise than a fool, right? I mean, it's better to have knowledge than no knowledge, just be completely ignorant. But then he said, that's foolishness too, because at the end of your life, you both end up in the same place. You're both dead. Both of you had the same exact condition in the very end. You're both dead as a doorknob. And so, and then his conclusion was it's only God's wisdom that has any purpose or meaning, because all of man's wisdom and the things that he accumulated really didn't lead to anything. It didn't help him really in any way. And I think when we look at that, man's, when you think about God's knowledge, it's like infinite. So there's infinity. He has total and perfect. And man's knowledge in comparison is almost zero. I mean, we don't know the first thing about most things, whereas God knows everything perfectly, in intimate nature. I mean, he knows everything perfectly. He knows the past, the present, and the future. He knows everything. And so when you look at the cross, we know that the cross has power, right? The cross has power to save souls. It has the power to actually change people. You can't change the way you're living without God and without the power of the cross. And really, it gives purpose to your life. I mean, if there is no God, then why are we here? Paul said we're the most foolish of all people. If there is no God, we should all be hedonists, right? We should just eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow you're going to be dead. Live it up. Live for yourself. Why would you even care about anybody else? I mean, if there is no God, then what's the point? I mean, really, and this is the logical conclusion if you accept that premise. And that's why when people, Friedrich Nietzsche said God is dead, right? I mean, that was back in the 1800s. That pretty much screwed up our society, because if people start living that way, then you have things that happen like in Nazi Germany. Well, I like their clothes and their money. Take it, kill them. They're not.
But I said the exact same thing, so it doesn't matter if you don't believe in anything, then just do what you want to do. Why be good? Why do all of this? Why are you good? And their answer was, because you still should be a good person.
They still have a moral compass.
They still have that moral compass. So they still believe that.
That's stupid.
They said that they should still be a good person. You wouldn't be mean to people.
Well, why do they have that belief structure? That's a belief. Who taught them that? They're just getting some antiquated Christian doctrine. Why?
Well, wait a minute. It's my son, so.
I know, but no, I mean, you know what you should do is just take out your gun and say, I'm tired of talking to you. Boom.
But he wouldn't do that because he still feels that you still should be a good person.
But why? No, I mean, I'm saying you could pretend because the reality is that if there is no moral structure, then it's whatever I want to do, I do. And there's no limits.
He thinks that there's moral structure as far as,
Why?
Society.
Why?
Structure.
That's not good for me. If I can, I mean, it's better if you just,
I'm not trying, I don't agree with atheists, but a lot of atheists do have, they're good people, they just don't believe in God. I mean, they'll do nice things for people and things like that. But I understand where you're coming from.
But why would they do nice things for people? It's only because they want something.
They could
No.
be.
Or they got a guilty conscience, because they do have a conscience because God put it there. And so they're trying to justify they're trying in their own mind to say, well, even though we're atheists, we can be good. And how could a just God throw somebody who's being good into hell? And so,
They don't believe in God.
well, I'm not saying they're saying that overtly.
No.
He will when he dies.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is it's not logical. It's not rational. The rational approach would be that if you don't believe in God, do whatever you want. I mean, why would you limit yourself in any type of moral behavior? That's just stupid. If you don't believe in God, then just do what you want. You're going to die anyways. You know what? I'm sick. Boom. Done. I mean, really, and that's why suicide's on the rise. That's why all these things. If people don't believe in God, they just do whatever. And that's kind of what's crept into our society, is once you get rid of the reality of God, then why would you even care what happened to another person? Because you're going to die anyways. It doesn't matter. You're going to become dust. You're just becoming nothing. It just doesn't matter.
They do, but like I said, they do care. They do care.
Well, how do you know they care?
Because I know he cares.
Yeah, I mean, he gives money to charities.
Charities, and he's really nice. I mean, he'd give you a shirt off his back. I mean, pays people's bills. I mean, so.
Put that moral compass up because of the way he was raised.
Yeah, I mean, he was raised. He
He was
doesn't.
raised with the
He hasn't rejected the totality of Christianity yet.
He's got all the sacraments.
Yeah, I mean, he's a child. I mean, he's once.
Still a child of God.
Yeah, he is, because he's been baptized. There's a difference too, is that it makes an indelible mark on your soul. It's when you're baptized. But I guess what I'm pointing out is, I like to talk to people in the manner, I've talked to atheists, and I've told them, I said, well, I agree. I think you got it right. I said, but I like that coat you're wearing. Boom, I'm going to take it. I mean, really, if you don't have a moral compass, then what's keeping you from doing whatever you want, to whomever you want, however you want to do it? I mean, there is no reason why you wouldn't.
Well, they would say the repercussions or
Yeah, like
the
you're in
consequences.
jail.
I'll go to
You're
jail.
gonna go to jail.
You're gonna die. Like they don't want to die.
What do you mean you're going to get, not if I don't get caught?
Well, I understand, but
But
they
people
still
still
have
need
that
God.
moral they still have that moral society compass that you still do good, you still.
Well, why do they have that, though? I'm just saying that it's getting rejected.
They just don't believe in God. I mean, they just don't believe that there's this being that's,
I know, but I guess what I'm pointing to is there's a whole political, what happens is it creeps in slowly like that, and then you get parties, let's say, and they're, because we believe as Catholics, the ends don't justify the means. So I'm not going to go and kill, let's say I'm against abortion. I'm not going to go kill the abortionist because I don't want him to do that. The ends, me shooting the guy, does not justify the means, which is to stop more abortions happening. The ends, me lying, cheating, and stealing, and doing whatever is necessary to win a vote, because I'm violating all of these commandments of God, is not justified by I can't do all these things because I want an end result of having this person in over another. And so if you have no right and wrong that's governing, they'll maybe on some things they'll stick to it, but on others they won't. But unfortunately, if you don't have a premise that's based on God's law governing your society, you're going to have real problems down the future. And that's what I'm kind of pointing out, is that once this goes down, it's a slippery slope, because the logical conclusion of rejecting God, they start, I'm a good person. After a while, why do that? You know what? I mean, round up those stupid people that are voting, and put them in a camp and get rid of them. Then we won't have to worry about them in the future.
Sounds like China.
Exactly. Take them to a re-education camp. And that's what they did. I mean, they did that to, I think the guy who was in charge of Alibaba, he's the one that I was mispronouncing on purpose. But anyways, they took him and they put him in a re-education camp. I mean, that you think it can't happen here, but look what's happening in other countries like Canada. It could happen here. And so I guess the logical conclusion of not believing in God, not having God as the moral structure, is do whatever you want, because there is no right and wrong. It's whatever's right for me. Might makes right. And that's the way it pretty much goes. I mean, it's kind of like when you got a big truck on the road, hauling 120,000 tons. You're going to be, and you're in a little Uber car that it gets about, a smart car. You better watch out, because that truck is going to hit you like a bug in a rug, and it ain't even going to. The two vehicles aren't going to matter. It doesn't matter to them. It's just bigger, and it's going to swat it over. It's the same principle. If you don't have any moral compass guiding you or your family or your society, then you're in a real problem. And I see that happening in our own country. You see it, and it's being institutionalized in the laws that we have. And so that was kind of the point I made. I'm not in any way promoting not, following the commandments and doing the things of God, but I'm showing this is the logical conclusion. At this point, they may, and I know people, they say, I'm a good person, I do this and I do that, but I don't believe in God, and they'll come up with a reason why they don't believe in God. God allows suffering, and He allowed this person, and it's understandable. They can be upset because they don't understand what's going on in the world. But when you have that, and then all of a sudden you're saying, well, lying's okay, murder's okay, cheating's okay, everything's okay if it accomplishes what I want to get accomplished. Do you see how that is? And that's the ends justify the means. And we don't. And St. Thomas Aquinas was really big on the ends do not justify the means. You can't do evil. You know, two wrongs don't make a right. Right? That's a simple way of putting it. Okie doke, let's get into the gospel. Because we went a little slow on the first few readings.
Nobody's
So it
asking,
should be
Joe,
with
we're just
Esther.
waiting.
What's that?
So Joe, we're always asking, we're waiting.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Since the Passover of the Jews was near, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. He found in the temple area those who sold oxen, sheep, and doves, as well as the money changers seated there. He made a whip out of cords and drove them out of the temple area with the sheep and oxen, and spilled the coins of the money changers, and overturned their tables. And to those who sold doves he said, "Take these out of here, and stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples recalled the words of Scripture, "Zeal for your house will consume me." At this the Jews answered and said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered and said to them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. Therefore, when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they came to believe the Scripture and the word Jesus had spoken. While he was in Jerusalem for the feast of Passover, many began to believe in his name when they saw the signs he was doing. But Jesus would not trust himself to them because he knew them all and did not need anyone to testify about human nature. He himself understood it well. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. So we have Jesus. So this is actually, I was thinking about this particular miracle, right? This is a miracle. And the reason I say it's a miracle is in Jerusalem, there was typically about 300,000 people. At Passover, the historian Josephus said it would be up to 1.3 million people that would be in the city. And so every nook and cranny would have a person put in there. You know, you have a spare bedroom, you'd have people everywhere would have people. And so Jesus went in the temple area, and this is acres. This isn't a little area like the size of this room, right? This is acres and acres. And they would have had 10 or 15,000 people out there selling, you know, all the different sacrifices, because they would slaughter 250,000 different animals every Passover. And they typically would do it from 3 o'clock, you know, from like 3 to 6 or 12 to 3, you know, in that range. And so that's why when Jesus died on the cross, it was the same time as the sacrifices that were taking place for the for the Passover. So because he's the new Passover lamb. And so it happened at the same time. But 250,000, think of all the bloodshed that would have happened. And so what they were doing is the high priest, he would have, so people would bring in their sacrificial animals, and they would be the best animals they had, right? They would have no blemishes. And they would say, well, no, that one's not good enough. You have to buy one of our animals. And it just so happens if it was $1, now it's $10. They'd charge 10 times the cost. So that's why Jesus later said, "You have made my Father's house a den of thieves," because they were overcharging the heck out of them. And this area was not supposed to be for highway robbery or selling animals. It was supposed to be for all the Gentiles to come and worship. This was an area that God had designated for the Gentiles to gather, all the nations to gather and worship in this area. And so the fact that he wrapped up a few cords and he drove them all out, there would have been 300 or 400 guards, and these were big burly guards. I mean, they weren't little, you know, they at one point I read a historical account where they threw some lemons at the high priest, and the guards killed thousands. They slaughtered thousands just for them throwing lemons at the high priest. Well, this is cutting into his money. So it must have taken the power of God to drive all these men and all these animals out of this area. How did he do it? I mean, there could have been 20, 30,000, men and animals combined. I mean, this is a big with a little whip of, so he would have gotten some ropes because there would have been ropes everywhere because there's animals, right? You always, you have animals. I mean, even on the farm, there's hay bales, you can get the ropes, and sometimes you can tie it up and use it for whatever. Well, he would have had ropes that were pulling the animals around, and that's what he made is these little cords. So you got one guy. Why wouldn't some big burly guy just grab him and say, "What are you doing, dude?" And then they would all beat him and stone him because he's cutting into the money. And so this is a miracle. And it's really understated. It said, and drove them all out of the temple area. That's all it says. I mean, the miracles in the Bible are very, very understated. You'll have this and he was transfigured. Well, that means he took a non-physical state. I mean, what the heck? I mean, they're really understated. They just stated as one-liners, a matter of fact. So he drove them all out of the temple area. And so this is a miracle of God's vengeance, right? I mean, these people were defrauding people that were coming to worship God in his temple area. And it was all the other ones that Jesus did. There was a couple times that he did this, but all the other miracles Jesus had were of compassion and empathy, where someone's, they needed healing, he'd heal them. If, they had a demon, he'd drive it out. And if they needed wine, he even did that. They had wine. These were all, compassionate miracles. But this one was not. He was driving out the evil which was taking place in the temple. Now, they thought that the Messiah was going to come and destroy the Romans, right? Not them. Jesus, instead, he's driving them out instead of driving the Romans out. And so I just thought that was really interesting, as this is kind of a miracle of wrath. But you see how God wasn't happy with this, because he had set up his church, this temple as the place and where God would dwell and people would come and worship God. And instead, the people that were in charge were perverted, and they used it to just to steal from people, charging, these terrible high prices for stuff. It's kind of like when you go to the airport and you need gas to fill up, and it's $7 a gallon. It's like, what the heck? And you have to go there because it's right next to it. It's kind of a similar thing, except it'd be $70 a gallon, and you had to get it from there because you needed to make you had to make the sacrifice. You had to make the offerings. So you had to have the animal.
It's like going to the store and buying food lately.
Yeah, you're right.
I did that. That's what Joe
Me
said.
too.
One day.
I went yesterday.
Yeah, it's expensive. It really is. And okay, so now we are going to get into a lighter subject. We are on chapter 12, page 281, Growing in Prayer. Growing in Prayer, page 281, chapter 12. Growing in prayer is simply another dimension to growing in love. Nevertheless, it is useful to consider our progress in love from the perspective of prayer, which is our direct, focused, conscious communing with God. We've already seen how Teresa of Avila insists that the essence of prayer, whether it is vocal or mental, is paying attention to God, speaking and listening to Him. She also talks about some of the things that happen as we grow in prayer. So what is prayer? It's speaking to God and listening to God, right? It's just a conversation. When we're praying, we're talking to God. And it's okay to, I've had a lot of conversations with God where it's like, what's going on here? When you don't understand things, it's okay to ask Him, I don't understand this, Lord. I thought this, and this. Show me where I'm not thinking this properly or whatever. And I think and then listen. I think it's important to have quiet too, where you're just in silence and you don't always have to be talking. That's probably easier for the guys to do than the girls, but. So.
Notice how we're all silent.
But prayer is a journey. I guess that's the point that she's going to show. Is Teresa's going to show that it's the beginning of the Christian journey. It seems that we're doing most of the work. But as we progress, we become more aware of the initiation and action of God working in us, leading us, guiding us, and transforming us. She talks of beginning to include moments of recollection or quieting of the soul in our meditation and recitation of established prayers, where we find ourselves better able to be aware of God and simply to be in His presence. This recollection can then deepen into the prayer of quiet. A little further down, she says, Teresa makes clear that the prayer of union is not normally experienced for lengthy periods of time while we're still on this earth. She mentions how the first time she experienced this depth of absorption, it lasted only the length of a Hail Mary. The longest she experienced the prayer of union was for about a half hour. And so when we're in heaven, we're going to be in complete union with God, right? And so God gives us a foretaste, so we'll have a longing for heaven. He wants us to be on this journey. He wants to help us along. And if you're not there yet, it's okay. And I think we have to kind of surrender to God's timing on this. It's usually a longer process. It's typically if you're going through a lot of steps real fast, a lot of the saints that had happen, they died young, so I'd rather take the slower journey. Give me more time. But I mean, that was my own interpretation of it. That's not in the book. But that is what happened is, I mean, like St. Therese and some of the ones, they died young. They got a lot of, they went up the ladder real quick. They took like an elevator up, and then they died young. Where other people, they get a little bit over time. You'll get, you may be praying for a long time, and then only after a while are you able to really be reflective. And so they go through, and there's a lot of steps here. We'll start with the first one, the challenge of meditation and prayer. So it's kind of thinking of God. That's the first point, is we're thinking of God. So meditation, reflecting on the scriptures or spiritual reading, is an important and necessary component of prayer. More strictly defined, meditation is thinking about God. So we're not actually talking to God, we're thinking about God, right? We're meditating upon His Word. We're thinking about God and maybe the things that He's done, the things that He promised to do. We're remembering the things that He did in the past. We're thinking about Him. So, unfortunately, a lot of times people fall asleep when when you're doing this kind of prayer. I mean, you just like conk off. I mean, you're praying, and next thing you know, you're sleeping. Actually, that's usually, if I want to fall asleep, a lot of times I'll start another rosary, and then boom. But St. Therese said, don't be discouraged. She said, those of us who are parents know that we sometimes love our children even more when they finally go to sleep. We love our children when they're asleep, and sometimes we love them even more because they are asleep. She has great confidence in God's love for us. He knows our weakness and loves us anyways. Sleepiness during prayer times has been a human reality. So St. Bernard kind of looks at it in a different way, though. He says, should we come to an end for the sake of those who are asleep here? I thought about that with one sermon. I should fulfill my promise about the two kinds of ignorance, and I would have. But it is already too long for those who are tired of it. Some I can see yawning, some are asleep, and no wonder, for last night's vigils were prolonged. So that excuses them. Well, what shall I say to those who were asleep then and now are asleep again? So Therese says that even if we're not fully attentive in prayer, little by little, even imperfect prayer will change us. Simply showing up evidences our desires to be with the Lord. So first, we're strengthening our will. I mean, everybody knows that when you start something new, you got to just show up. Because when you start, you're very bad at it, but you got to just keep going, and you'll get better. But you got to show up. You can't give up. And so Teresa likens the first stage of prayer to the work of drawing water from a deep well by hand with a rope and a bucket in order to cultivate the garden of our soul. It takes a lot of effort to do that. But it does get easier. And then the second one is recollection, which is on page 285. As we immerse ourselves in Christian teaching and the practice of the Christian life through participation in the Mass, of prayer, spiritual reading, and contact with our fellow Christians, we are more able to think and pay attention to the Lord. We'll eventually begin to experience a certain calming recollection of our soul, where we are more able just to be in the Lord's presence and be aware of Him. So some have music or a candle, or they just are there in God's presence, and they're requiring recollection. And then infused prayer, which is contemplation. So now this infused prayer is which is on page 286. Infused or contemplative reflection is recollection that comes or is enhanced by the touch of God in the soul. It's a becoming aware of God's presence and closeness. It is something to which our own efforts can dispose us to, but never bring to pass simply by our own effort or will. I think, and you might have a presence where you just realize that you're a temple of the Holy Spirit and God's dwelling within you. I mean, if you just meditate upon that from now until the end of Lent, and it'll change. I mean, because that's when you realize that God is within you, dwelling within you. You're a temple of the Holy Spirit, and God, the Trinity, dwells within you. I mean, how marvelous is that? I mean, that's our identity. That's who we are. We're children of God. He said we are. And He's the Word of God. All things were created just by His Word. He said we're His children. We are His children, and He's dwelling within us. And when you think about that, God is within us. I mean, how amazing is that? We're made in His likeness and image, and He's dwelling within us. And then God will sometimes He'll draw and He'll give you that awareness that I'm present. I'm here with you. And that's amazing. It changes your life. I mean, this is a life-changing event, is when God pushes that awareness in, so you're aware of His presence as you're going through your day. Teresa describes the beginning of this infused contemplation or recollection as a hearing or being drawn by God to open to His presence and pay attention. She makes clear again that this is not a matter of imagining being with Him or thinking about the truth or the interior indwelling, although these are good elements of meditation, but an almost imperceptible interior hearing of the gentle whisper of the shepherd's whistle. So there's that realization. I mean, it's not just a thinking that God is there, but it's the actual realization, and God makes Himself present. And I think, St. Teresa of Avila said that all Christians so the first step again is what? Step 1, no mortal sins. Once you're past step 1, there's no reason you can't go all the way into the spiritual life. But you have to be past step 1. You have to, make that commitment not to commit any mortal sins again, ever. And then you can go all the way to the end. But if you don't make that step 1, then, basically Satan's got a chain around you. And he's going to drag you right into hell when you die. I mean, that's the truth. That's the teaching of the church. Because we say, no, I love my sin more than I love you, God. I choose sin. I choose hell. God doesn't. It's us choosing where we want to go. It's not God, I don't like that He has a smart mouth. Throw him into hell. No, that's not how it goes. We choose our destiny. It's ultimately our choice. We're the ones who choose whether we go to heaven or hell. And so the first step we have to do is make that commitment not to commit any more mortal sins. And if you're in a mortal sin, go to confession, right? And do a good examination of conscience. Go to confession, and you'll glow, right? You'll feel lighter. Your whole life it's gone from you. And then God, He'll make Himself present to you, and all the angels in heaven are delighting over the fact that you went to that confession. And it's not a bad thing. You just go and you get yourself. Why would you want to carry that burden around? I always liken it to the chains. You carry the heavy chains, and they're not locked, but we're carrying them around. Get them off, throw them off, and be free, so you can actually function in the world. Because Satan doesn't want. He wants you to, live in shame and guilt and fear. That's where he wants you, because then he has you under his control. God doesn't want it. He wants us to be free. He wants us. We should be the freest of men, because we're not afraid of life and we're not afraid of death. There's nothing that we should be afraid of. We should be the freest of all people and most joyful, because the things of this world, they're passing, right? It's just a matter of time, and that'll pass. Even if I'm sick, it's going to pass. It's ultimately going to be a better place I'm going to go to. So if I go, I go. I think when we have this preoccupation with everything of the world, then we're living in fear. And I think, God doesn't want that. And so we want to just stop sinning, and then we will hear the shepherd's whistle. God, He wants to take you all the way. He wants to make Himself known. And St. Faustina, she said, Jesus complained, most souls, they're too noisy. They don't care about me. They don't care about anything I did for them. They're worried about the things of the world. So Teresa reiterates that the granting of this touch from God has some relationship to our turning away from the things of the world, our detachment, and a growing desire to make room in our lives for God. So you have to empty your cup, right? If it's totally filled to the top, can you put anything else in it? No. If you're so full with yourself, then how can you allow God to come in? So there's truths that are there that we have to allow God, we have to be detached of the things of the world, because we don't want to have them, because if we put the things of the world above God, then they become a false idol. And so we have to be detached from the things of the world. We have things in this world, but we're not taking it with us. Do you know anybody that's enjoying their Ford Explorer while they're 6 feet under? No, you don't, because you can't take anything with you. I was going to say Cadillac, but I didn't want to.
Lincoln.
What's that?
Lincoln,
yeah, I know.
Mortal sin.
But I think it's important that we really realize that. So she does say that there's some kind of relationship between turning away from the things of the world. And that goes exactly with Scripture. What does Scripture say? The flesh is at war with the Spirit, right? The things of the flesh are at war with the things of the Spirit. And so you don't want to be possessed or controlled by any particular, things. We want to, and we want to surrender, and say, God, we need His help. And it's amazing that once you do that, the freedom that you'll have, that you'll realize that you're living in His divine will. And that makes all the difference, because then your life won't be filled with fear and anxiety and worry. And I think about my own dad, who he never, he was his attitude was always, oh, God will provide. I'm like, you're crazy. I thought he was nuts. Oh, God will provide. Oh, yeah, God's really providing. He's got 9 kids. When He did, we never were hungry. We always had food. We always had clothing. We even had vacations every year. And he was a principal in a Catholic school. He made like $12,000. But God always provided. Things would just work out, everything would work out, where we always had enough. But he just had that faith that, as long as he was faithful to God, God would help him get through all that. He never was afraid to work. I mean, there was times, he'd work all the time. But God provided, and I think that's important that we have that attitude, that just to be detached of the things of the world, because I see that as materialism is a huge problem for this world. And then we are getting into the last book because we're on the last chapter. And I told someone we would finish tonight. So we are on page 88, the second number 10. So there's 2 chapter 10s. So we're on the second one. And Mordecai said, "These things have come from God, for I remember the dream that I had concerning these matters. And none of them has failed to be fulfilled. The tiny spring which became a river, and there was a light in the sun and the abundant water. The river is Esther, whom the king married and made queen. The 2 dragons are Haman and myself. And the nations are those that gather to destroy the name of the Jews. And my nation, this is Israel, who cried out to God and were saved. The Lord has saved his people. The Lord has delivered us from all these evils. God has done great signs and wonders, which have not occurred among the nations. For this purpose he made 2 lots, one of the people of God and one for all the nations. And these 2 lots came to the hour and moment and day of decision before God and among all the nations. And God remembered his people and vindicated his inheritance. So they will observe these days in the months of Adar, on the 14th and 15th of that month, with an assembly and joy and gladness before God, from generation to generation, forever among his people Israel. In the 4th year of the reign of Ptolemy and Cleopatra, Dositheus, who said that he was a priest and a Levite, and Ptolemy his son brought to Egypt the preceding letter of Purim, which they said was genuine and had been translated by Lysimachus, the son of Ptolemy, one of the residents of Jerusalem. I massacred those names, but the end. So it's kind of amazing when Mordecai says that all these things that he had in this dream, this prophecy, were fulfilled in exactly the way that they thought they were. So this is the end of Esther in this book. And so next we'll be getting into Isaiah, which I figured will take about a year.